Welcome to Ren Faire History, a podcast presented to you by the digital Ren Faire. I'm here this morning with Christopher Buehlman, who goes way back in Renaissance Festival history, almost as far as I do. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to see you.
So, Chris, I'd like to start out just by asking you what got you into this crazy business of ours? Where did you start your Renaissance Festival or medieval fair activity?
Yeah, well, I am from St. Petersburg, Florida, and many moons ago, my father, Joseph Buehlman, took me to the Bay Area Renaissance Festival, which was in Largo, and I don't remember much about that. I mean, I was 10 or 11 years old. This would have been 79 or 80 when I went. But I do remember seeing a guy with snot all over his face and coming out of his ears, and he was the rat catcher. And it was actually really fun for me many years later to be a balding 30-something and to tell Jim Green, the rat man, that I remember seeing him when I was 10.
That's
and
great.
He squinted his eyes, and I knew what he was really seeing was the sun glinting off the reaper's scythe. So, yeah, that was the first time I went to a fair, and I loved it. And I would bother, my parents to take me, my mom to take me back later. And so, yeah, that's how it started. Well, my involvement started when I subsequently volunteered, which is pretty much how you get hired by Jim Peterson. I volunteered to work at the Bay Area show as one of the human chess men, because I always liked the human chess match. I always liked people playing with swords and spears and flails and clubs and things. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So you got involved as a stage combat participant there at Sarasota.
Without the benefit of any training or even really very much physical fitness at that time. So me and my buddy Jeff Horick just went and bought a couple of shitty swords and went in the backyard and swung them at each other and tried to figure out how to make that look entertaining. And these swords were not built for that.
We do not recommend starting out this way. No. I was saying that worked out for you, and it worked out for Jeff as well, because he later became a jouster and has made a good living with his sword.
Yeah, two big adolescent dudes, 118 and 120, just both embarked on careers then. Who knew?
Indeed. So that was your home show, as it were. And what dragged you out on the road?
A lot of things, really. I mean, first of all, I just liked being at a Ren Faire. That was just my favorite thing that happened. Like many people, in my community who were volunteers out there, I would get excited around October that Ren Faire season was coming around again. And just the idea that some people would just go on the circuit and be able to be at Ren Fairs all the time sounded amazing to me. I did want to get through college first, but I took my time about doing that. I sort of did junior college and didn't much care, and I was waiting tables and didn't much care about that either. And it wasn't until after I graduated finally from Florida State with my French major and my history minor that I formally embarked on the road. I did do one summer at Sterling in 92 while I was still in college. But the subsequent summer, 93, I got a scholarship to study in Paris. So I skipped Sterling that year. But by the time 94 rolled around, I did Sterling in the summer. I got hired for the first time at Ohio that fall. And I was off to the races, so to speak.
I see. Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you ended up doing at Sterling and Ohio.
Sure. Well, my friend Allison Williams had worked at Sterling in 1991. I think she worked with the Jousters, I think she was selling merchandise for them. And she came back and said they've got the best, acting program, and let's all get in a car and go to Orlando and go to the Southeastern Theater Conference and audition. And that sounded fun. So I did that. I knew nothing about the fair. I didn't, just sounded like a fun thing to do that day, really. But I think four of us went, and we did, we ended up in a hotel room, and there was Gary Izzo and some other folks I would later get to know. And we did, freeze justifications and other improv exercises. And on the strength of that, I ended up getting hired. And they gave me a call, and they said they wanted me to be on court. They wanted me to play maybe Sir Walter Raleigh. But I had just read The Tragedy of Dr. Faustus, and I asked if I could play it, as if the playwright and poet Christopher Marlowe were visiting court. So that's what I did.
Marlowe it was.
And then Marlowe it was. So that was 92.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your first summer at Sterling. What was that experience like for you?
I'll have to say, not to wax superlative, but I'll have to say that was the most intensely magical and beautiful and fun season I ever had at a Renaissance festival. The training program there, especially back then, especially when Gary himself was a young man, and and I was surrounded by people like, Lauren Bone Noble and Patty Buckley, and there were all of these amazing, David Rosenberg, for Christ's sake. There were these amazing comedic geniuses working at the show in those days. And man, I felt like, I wasn't a theater major. Like I said, I was French and history, but I felt like I got a crash course with all the best people in doing comedic improv and doing, improvisational outdoor theater. It was intense. There was a 3-week training process, about 6 days a week. There was some stage combat. And when you're doing that show, you're in the middle of the most beautiful, beautiful countryside. Upstate New York in June and July is something like paradise. It's about as good as it gets. There were nights we would all decamp out to the bluffs, the McIntyre Bluffs, and sit around on blankets, drinking wine and listening to Jim Hancock play songs on his guitar and watching what was reputed to be the second best sunset in the world. And I said, well, who rates sunsets? And somebody said, the photographers of National Geographic. And I had to say, okay.
Yeah. Now, these are bluffs that look out over Lake Ontario facing west. And they're, about 60 or 80 feet above the water. And it truly is a magnificent place and one of the great fringe benefits to visiting or working at the fair in Sterling. I'm tearing up right now thinking about all the wonderful times out there. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that you share that that fondness for that spot and that place and also that experience, because my first Renaissance Festival experience was also getting cast for Sterling and hitting that land and that experience and those amazing people and that magical experience. And that is a little bit about, what we're trying to get at with this podcast is there does seem to be, the word magic comes up consistently as people talk about what it is that brought them in, or at least kept them in this business. And just wonder if you want to expand on that concept at all, because I heard you use the word. And what is that magic, do you think?
Yeah, that's hard to get at. It's a combination of things, I guess. It's some of it I'm sure just came from being young. We were all like,
there's always magic
21,
there.
22, 23.
Yeah.
There's a lot of magic inherent in that. But, you're thrown together with, other people your age, and, I guess it's fair to say that there's a cult-like quality to it, because, you're singing songs and you're isolated and you develop rapid bonds with people because you're put in positions where you need to trust one another, theatrically.
Right.
And those bonds stick. I mean, some of the people that I was with that year and other early years at Sterling remain very close friends. You know, I'm thinking of Charles Murray. I'm thinking of Adam Sullivan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think a lot of it was ensemble, but ensemble on the very deepest level. You take the ensemble you get from a theatrical experience when you're on a cast and you're working closely with people, and that's a very tight bond. But you combine that with being in this natural setting straight out of Sir Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, and then again the youth thing and summer, and you know, you really, and then also just working with sort of a wise mentor in Gary Izzo, and sort of a captain you felt a lot of confidence in, and you do have all the sort of recipe ingredients for forming really deep bonds with people. And there really is something about that site too, not just the countryside, but I mean, that site in particular seems to be a focal point for something, you know. I don't want to get all woo about it, but I mean, there's a feeling you have when you're there that is unlike any other place that I've been.
Yeah, I definitely recognize that as well. Yeah, I think there was something about when a place has a consistent experience that is that it's steeped in, I think that does imbue a place with a certain character, a certain vibe, a certain feeling. And that is a place that has just been the place of so much laughter and so much joy and so much release. I especially, I think I've shared this in this podcast before, the experience that, especially in that first decade or so of Sterling that I experienced, of how people came in to the festival not necessarily knowing what they were getting into. You know, this was a fair in the woods, a craft fair. What is this? And then the overwhelming commitment to character and commitment to time and place and theme that everybody there brings creates this sort of well of experience that people drift into and find themselves in and find themselves giving over to. And it's that giving over, I think, that gives that sense of release, that sense of, I can simply let go of everything else in my life that I may be concerned about and just experience this present reality here, and trust, you know, again, and the ensemble trusts itself and trusts each other, and they exude that trust and that faith and bring the audience into that experience. And people can just simply release into the fun and the comedy and the interaction and the sense of sort of safety that is wrapped into that whole place.
Yeah, and that stuff happens during the training process. You get a lot of those things from your ensemble work, but when you also bring it, when you open the fair, and you bring in these crowds of people, and you bring in what I would later become, which is variety entertainment, like yourself. I find this fascinating. So we put on a Renaissance festival sort of to emulate these fairs that would happen historically, you know, when people lived in small communities, small agrarian communities, and they didn't get to, you know, see a lot of different people outside their village. They would really look forward to once per year, you know, going to, like, I think, thinking of in Troyes, France, the hot fair or the cold fair, you know, and so ostensibly we're doing this theatrical thing, emulating this, but then we end up actually creating it, and we end up having a similar actual dynamic where people from these little towns in New York show up and interact and buy things, and it sort of becomes very much like an actual Renaissance era fair.
Yeah, I find that fascinating too, how it just in the act of emulation, you invoke all of these characters the characteristics of the event, of the
Yes.
time and place.
Restating, I guess, but I just love the idea that a person from 1570 might have gone to one of these fairs and had a little too much beer and met somebody they ended up coming together with romantically, and may have spent too much money on incense and clothes and fabric and things like that, and then come home and been sorry they had to go back to the plow. And it's not so different from a guy, or gal working at CVS and going to the fair and having a little too much to drink and hooking up and buying a dress you couldn't really afford, and and having to go back to work. It's all very cool that it's so similar.
And then there's the experience of the performer, the actor, the player who comes to one of these festivals and discovers that there's a whole world of festivals out there.
Yeah, that was amazing to me. And by the time I had done Sterling, I was still finishing college. But when I got out in '94, in the spring of '94, I did Sterling in the summer, and I went on to do Ohio in the fall. But then in the winter, I was just going to go ahead and do what I had done before to make money, which was to wait tables and bartend. But I found I didn't care for it anymore. So that November, I just quit. I had this restaurant job, and I was like, I'm so tired of being talked down to by people just above you in management. This really can be, depending on the place you're at, it can be a fairly rough industry as far as the way people treat one another. And boy, I was not having a good time at it. So I said, you know what, I'm done. But I didn't have a plan B, and I wasn't going to be working again until March. So I tapped into another skill set I have, and I started painting holiday scenes on windows. And that's how I got through. I squirreled away a bunch of money in November, December painting, Christmas and, winter scenes, and lived on that until the fair came around again. But that was my last quote unquote real job.
Okay. So the next season, you, where did you start?
I did the Bay Area show. And that's where I developed the gig that was to become my main gig. It was Bay Area. We got to rewind again now. We got to go back because I was volunteering and doing the chess match and all that, but I was also starting at the age of 20 in 1989. I had also been invited to run the stocks with my friend Jeff. He just did it with me that first year. It was just me after that. But we were told by the director, go ahead and put people's heads and arms in the stocks, and you can put a silly hat on them and charge them $1 to take a picture, and you keep the $1. And I was like, great. But it bored the shit out of me to just stick them in there and not say anything or do much. And I just started to talk to them. I'd be like, do you know why you're in here? And I started developing insult material. I started telling them, about their questionable paternity or their terrible looks or how hard it was to stand near them smelling the way they do. And they liked it, and their friends liked it. And it wasn't very long at all before people would say, keep going, and they give me a little more money. And I began to realize that I could, keep writing this material, and people would keep paying me to abuse their friends. And of course, back in those days, if you wanted to really roast somebody, it would be $5 insult. Watch out. Yeah, but that's how that started. When I got to Ohio in '94, I was actually hired to be a stocksman. I was going to work their stocks, but I had not been to site. And they just had some shitty little stockades right out in the middle of the sun. And that fair starts hot. So I worked that first weekend, and it was a failure. So I went back to the director, and I said, hey, can I just make a sign that says insults and have people pay me to insult their friends? And just wherever they are. And they said yes. Little did I know, there was already a guy on circuit doing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which is another interesting facet of festivals and how circumstances, sort of create opportunity that people then step into. And, oftentimes it's a similar thing, and you're just simply in some way responding to human nature in some way that that creates an opportunity for you.
Right. So yeah, I did come to find out, and actually was frequently told once I started doing this. There was a dude named Christophe the Insulter out on the other circuit out west, and
Right.
I knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
But and our styles turn out to be very very different. But it's basically two dudes who creatively invented the steam engine at the same time, which happens too. But yeah, I didn't actually meet that guy.
Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't actually. I was going to say I didn't actually meet Tony until 2012. I just ran into him in Sterling one summer. When he was just visiting friends. So yeah,
that's interesting because I met Tony in the mid to late '80s at Sterling when he was on cast there, and before he became Seamus the Insulter. Though, but it's interesting that both of your arcs went through Sterling and through the training process there, and and on some level probably becoming sort of falling in love with the whole idea and becoming open. I think part of one of the things that the improv training and the depth of that training that goes on at Sterling, where you do develop, as you said, this really deep sense of trust, both in the others, but also in the method and in yourself, where you allow yourself to throw yourself into the space of yes, and say, I'll say yes to the situation to see what happens. And I'm not ascribing your entire career to this, but on some level, with the insults, that's what you did. Like, people said, I want some of this, and you said, well, yes, I'll do that. And then that becomes a growing shoot that grows in your life and takes on its own growth and reality.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I went to Sterling in '92, like I said, and I had already worked the stocks at Largo, and I remember Doug Konjolka came up to me, and I didn't know him yet. I just knew him as Miguel from the act Don Juan and Miguel, which was absolutely huge at Largo back then, and he just took me aside, and I was like, oh, he's talking to me, and he said, hey, I just want you to know that, hey, congratulations, you've been hired at Sterling. I just want you to know that what you do here is not necessarily going to be in the same spirit as what happens there. It's a very positive place, and he sort of laid all of that down, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. I'll be gentle. I'll be good. So, and I went through all the training and all of this. So one day I'm at Sterling, right? And I'm playing Christopher Marlowe. And here comes this woman dressed as a nun, and she's just visiting that day. I didn't know at the time this is a woman named Kelly Holden.
Oh.
And yeah. And, some bit started up, and I was like, I suppose, sister, you're trying to save me from hell. And she said, no, Master Marlowe, I'm trying to save you from making a further jackass of yourself than you already have done. And I was... This isn't gentle. So...
yeah, I adore Kelly. I worked with her. She worked with us doing mud shows at Sterling and also at Scarborough years ago. And one of the true wits, just an amazing and a character actress. And she's gone on. She does film roles and TV, and so she's in California now.
I started doing that stuff on the lanes. I had a sign that said insults on one side and you cheap bastard on the other, because invariably somebody would say, How much is it? What do I get for $1? And flip the sign. I do it myself for free. And flip the sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the lanes were challenging, and that's insulting randos on the lane with no microphone and no barrier that is a young man's game.
Yeah, and what was that learning curve like?
I can't tell you how many times somebody would say something along the lines of, "Hey, here's $5. See that guy? He just got out of county. Go insult him."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another thing I found too was that it really is strange because later on, as you well know, but for people who are unfamiliar, I mean, later on I would go on to develop this as a stage act, and later on it ended up being very lucrative for me because people were happy to pay me $20, $30, $40, $50 to bust on their friends in this stage show setting, which was a very different thing. But it kind of goes to show you that you sort of attract what you ask for. So when I would walk around with a sign that said insults, and I'd take a couple of bucks or $5 or maybe $10 to insult somebody in the streets, those are the times I really got treated the worst. I'd stand there and hold my sign up, and I'd have my mug, and I've actually got a beverage in my mug, and invariably somebody would shamble up to me and, "Here, get that guy," and put $2 right in my beverage, like I was a monkey, and here was my monkey cup.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a whole different thing when you're on stage. And I told you I was a bartender and a waiter, and I'm going to draw the analogy. I'm going to do it right now between working on the lane and working on a stage versus working as a waiter and working behind a bar. And I think the psychology of those things is similar in that when you are a waiter, you are perceived as being more servile because you're coming to people on their territory. They have a table. You approach them. You ask them what they need, and you're in their space. But when you approach a bar, nobody orders the bartender around. That's a very different thing. And I would say that when you have people running around in the lanes, there's a lot more mistreatment of those people than, because I've certainly been touched and handled doing improvisational characters out in the streets. But when you're physically up on a stage, there's a whole different psychology that's happening, and where they might go $5 to insult somebody on the street. If you go, "Yeah, here's $20, insult my friend," to the guy on the stage, it's different.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. I had never thought of that one before. Yeah. So somewhere along in the line here, clearly your writing material. I'm sure a lot of it is off the cuff, but you're probably starting to develop insults and pieces of writing, and that I'm going to use that as a convenient segue into another part of your career. At what point did you start treating your writing as a serious part of your career portfolio?
From the beginning.
Yeah.
I want to quash a possible misconception or mischaracterization. My insult gig was not largely improvisational. I wrote that material, and I loved sitting down with my notebook and dreaming up the worst possible things that I could say to somebody in a good-natured way. And so I was writing material like any other stand-up comic. Mm-hmm. I would improvise, obviously, and I could certainly get into an insult battle with somebody and riff on what was presented to me. But I did have a very well developed and constantly growing arsenal of material to fall back on.
Sure.
But during those times, I mean, if I were to characterize my 20s, I would say that was the time I was writing poetry and insults, mm-hmm. because I was really interested in poetry. And I was submitting poems to magazines and, all of that, trying to work on my craft and doing so very seriously. In my 30s, when I started developing the insults as a stage act, that's also when I started getting interested in writing plays. And I wrote a number of short plays in my early 30s. And by my late 30s, I was writing full-length plays. And it was right about that time that I remembered, fuck, I was going to be a novelist. So
I had written, what have I been doing?
I had written, what have I been doing all this time? I'm aging. I'm mortal. Fuck. So yeah, but I had written, when I was like about 31 years old, I had written the first draft of a horror novel, and I always loved horror, still do. And wait, hold on, got my Amityville shirt on just to show my bona fides. So I'd written the first draft of a horror novel, and but then I put it, in the proverbial shoebox and left it for about 6 years. And then I was about 38 years old, and I went, man, I got to get that back out and fix that. It's been sitting there how long?
Yeah.
So I gave it a rewrite, started submitting it, and I began a very long process because I started re-editing that thing in 2007. By 2009, I finally got an agent, and which is no mean feat. But then the agent wanted revisions, so I did about another year and change process, turning that novel from a third-person book into a first-person narrative. It's a historical novel, and when you write a historical novel in the first person, you have to have a kind of casual authority that demands an extremely deep dive in research.
No doubt.
If I say it was set during in 1935 in Georgia, in the Deep South during the Depression, and the main character was a veteran of the First World War. So when I have Frank Nichols of Those Across the River talking about going over to getting shipped overseas, he'll mention, he'd say, I was on the Mount Vernon and we pulled it at Brest. Those are just things you casually say. But I had to figure all that stuff out. Where does a guy from Chicago go in the American Expeditionary Forces, and what kind of battle, what kind of action did he see? What was it like for those guys?
Right. Truth,
and a lot of, honestly, and nothing against them, a lot of people don't do that when they write historical stuff. They stick to character and plot, and that's fine. But I really like texture. So yeah. Those Across the River. That came out in 2011. Yeah, and that was the first horror novel. It was followed by, after that one came out and did fairly well for Penguin, now Penguin Random House, my editor said, well, what do you want to write for a second book? And it hadn't been published yet. There's quite a bit of lead time. So when I finished that manuscript and it was in the can, he was like, what do you want to write now? And I had enjoyed the research experience so much. I said, well, what period do I want to be in for the next year and a half of my life? And I thought, I've gone pretty deep into Renaissance era history, but I don't know the Middle Ages that well. I think I want to write a medieval novel. And then I thought about it and went, what are the things that scare me? It was like this apocalypse. And I was like, what's the apocalypse for the medieval world? And I went, plague. So, hey, they had one of those then. So I wrote so instead of doing the thing that's very popular and saying, what would happen if the plague happened today? Which sadly we just found out. But instead of doing, what would happen if the plague happened today? I said, what would happen if the plague happened when the plague happened? And that's how Between Two Fires came about. And I'll tell you that is, of the 5 horror novels I wrote, that's the one I'm proudest of. You're not supposed to pick favorites, but fuck it, that's my favorite. I really, really went hard on the history for myself, but I don't do big info dumps. I don't do lore and info dumps because I find them tedious.
You don't do those Tolstoy or Melville thing.
Yeah, no. No, what I like to do is give you is parcel out the history in an active way. Like like, you'll find out about something when you need to know it. So that's how I do it. But I think Between Two Fires is very. I'm so sorry about that. I think Between Two Fires is very immersive, and I went to a really vulnerable place with that book too, because it's about forgiveness and redemption, and I had some really hard personal stuff going on in my life at the time too. So there's a lot of heart in it, and if you go on like Goodreads and you look at things people say about it, it seems to resonate on an emotional level in a way that most of my books don't. The only one that seems to be as well liked is the fantasy novel I just wrote, The Black Tongue Thief.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. I haven't picked it up yet. I've been hearing very good things about it as well.
Yeah, that's the other book I'm proudest of. I don't want to have to choose between Two Fires and Black Tongue, but you know what? I don't have to.
Don't have to.
Yeah.
So that part of your life has grown up and become a pretty major force. I mean, you have a literary presence now, and which I would like to congratulate you upon. It's well, to say it's
Thanks.
amazing would be would be non-complimentary. I think but it's great that you've been able to do that, and this that you've been able to develop this part of your life, and in concurrent, so in some way your Renaissance Fair work subsidized that, I imagine, at least early on.
Yes, the one of the reasons I even though I very much enjoyed the festival circuit, it was a giant party when I was in my 20s and early 30s. I mean, I just had so much fun doing it. I did do it knowing, I always knew writing was my thing, and I always knew that this was a really good situation if I could develop the discipline to take advantage of, because people on the festival circuit, as you both well know, don't have much in the way of security, job security, health, and all of those things are very tenuous, and we are at the whim of fate in the way that people with more traditional jobs may not be. But one of the great perks of it is that for most of us, we can work 2 days a week, and but except those times we travel in between. Yeah, at least in the entertainment side of things. And again, in people doing variety acts, you probably will have a certain amount of rehearsal or practice. And if you're doing ensemble stuff like Sterling, you're working the whole time. But to be a variety entertainer, as I was,
Yeah, I just wanted to break in there also, because I think there was a misconception. People ask me, well, what do you do all the rest of your time? And it's like, well, I'm a self-employed person, so I do all of the maintenance and repair work that a lot of people will pay somebody else to do, because I'm living hand to mouth as I go along here. So there certainly is that aspect, but it does allow you to make choices about when you're going to fix that thing, and allow you to push things aside and to engage in the passions you have, like writing for you.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, I was not trying to suggest that we're all gold bricks or something, but I very specifically shaped my career so that it would leave me time during the week. I mean, I didn't develop props, I didn't get a partner, I didn't pursue my love of stage combat, because I really did enjoy it, and I thought about doing a show with somebody else and doing a fight show. But I set it up so that I could travel in a little Honda and have a notebook and a costume. And, I would write insults during the week, just about every week. But I was also writing, this other stuff. I was engaged in what I didn't know at the time was a long, and I did write every day. I was engaged in a long apprenticeship to become a novelist, because I developed imagery and sort of timing and brevity with poetry. Mm-hmm. Again, I didn't know that this was what I was doing, but and then what skills did I next need? Well, I went into playwriting, so I learned dialogue. Yeah. And then I went into full-length plays, and I developed act structure. So it was all pretty useful.
Mm-hmm. What about the feedback? Was in terms of having writing something a given week, then presenting it that weekend live? What do you think that taught you about the process and about dialogue and about human interaction?
Yes, that's you raise a good point. I mean, I was very lucky to be doing something, at least with Oh, and then the other thing I would say is, I was obviously writing comedic material, and humor is an important part of the books I write too. But yeah, you get instant feedback writing material like that, and more so, I dare say, than people working with partners in a show where it might be harder to introduce new material. I could just, my material, even when I had a show, it was a little bit like playing Tetris, just figuring out what piece needed to fit in what scenario when confronted with it. So I had small, bite-sized bits of material that I could, I didn't have to write a whole new show and watch a whole show flop if I was off. I could just go, oh well, that piece didn't work. Let's go to some shit I know works. Bang.
Right.
But instant feedback is great, glorious. No, sure. No, there's a story that I just love, and this would be from when I was like in the mid '90s, when I was playing a highwayman character at Sterling named Churchyard O'Shea, and this is a character that I played as an improvisational street character, but I would later develop into the other stage act that I performed. Another stage act I performed called Filthy Irish Stories, which I've been doing at Sterling since 2013. But okay, so I'm a young fellow. I'm like 25, 26 years old. I'm playing this highwayman, and I had from the costume shop, I had a fox pelt on my cloak, and I had this big floppy hat and feathers, and the fox had a string of pearls in his teeth, And one of my favorite bits to do, one of my favorite lati, was to jump out at a group of people as if I was robbing them and realize there are far too many of them for me to possibly rob and have to extricate myself, right? So I saw this group of people, and I was about to jump out and yell like hell, and I realized they were a bunch of special needs kids, adolescents. And I was like, oh, no, yelly, do not yell. So I thought, okay, let's just walk out and see what happens. So I just sort of stalked out into them looking like I was up to no good. And the teacher said, oh, look, it's a robber. Look at the nice robber. And they started gathering around me. And I was like, oh, hello, I'm just didn't mean to disturb you at your lunch. And they started petting the fox fur, This one little girl really liked the fox fur, and this little boy who had Down syndrome. He was the one who was petting the fox fur. That's right. And there was this girl, and she said, "Well, what do you think of the nice robber?" And said the girl's name. I can't remember her name. What do you think of him? And no, she asked. That's right. She asked. She said, "What do you think of the fox?" And she said, "It's dead." And I said, oh, that's just my friend Riley. He's having a nap. He got tired, and I picked him up and put him on my shoulder. I'm taking him home. And a little bit later, the teacher said, what do you think of the nice robber? And she went, he's handsome. He lied.
The unfiltered truth.
The unfiltered fucking truth.
Well, I'd like to thank Christopher Buehlman for joining us today on the Ren Faire History Podcast. I'm Jonthan Crocker, and you can find me at The Wild Men or Theater in the Ground, both on Facebook and on the net. Moremud.com and wildmen.com are our websites. So, Chris, over to you.
I'm Christopher Buehlman. I want to thank you guys for your interest and for your excellent questions, and for letting me relive a little bit of this wonderful adventure I've had with the Renaissance Festival world and community. And I don't really perform fairs at the moment. That may change, but I'm effectively retired from insulting. But if you would like to find my books, they're pretty easily found right now. The Black Tongue Thief is out pretty much everywhere, and if you go on Amazon, you can find the medieval horror novel Between Two Fires.
Thanks, Chris. This has been really a delight to get a chance to talk and hear a little bit more about the nuances of your progression and career paths. So thank you. Thank everybody for joining us here on the Ren Faire History Podcast, presented by Digital Ren Faire.